Society operates like an invisible chess game, where there are only 6 types of people controlling billions of others. Most of us are disposable pawns keeping the system running, while a few operate as efficient rooks executing superior orders. Rare knights create innovations that the true masters then capture for themselves. The queens exercise visible power that everyone can see, but the kings remain completely hidden, literally printing the money that we fight over like idiots. Their trillionaire fortunes never appear on Forbes because they control the lists themselves. They orchestrate every crisis, every war, and every economic collapse for consecutive centuries. Democracy is pure theater. Meritocracy is an elaborate farce, and the free market is total manipulation. But I discovered the only strategy that completely annihilates this millennial control, and they pray desperately that you never discover this liberating truth.
You wake up every morning thinking you're free. But here's what's really happening. You're in an invisible prison with billions of other people, and nobody even knows the rules of the game we're all playing. This isn't some pessimistic theory or conspiracy nonsense. This is the most accurate diagnosis of your life right now. And there's a tool that's been exposing this truth for over 1,000 years. It's been hiding in plain sight. While you navigate through the overwhelming complexity of the 21st century, frequently feeling lost among decisions that seem to lead nowhere, a disconcerting truth emerges. There is an underlying pattern governing every movement, every choice, and every apparent coincidence that shapes your destiny. The sensation of existential drift that haunts our era does not arise from chance. It originates from the collective inability to see the structures that determine who ascends, who remains stagnant, and who will inevitably be sacrificed. Chess, far from constituting mere intellectual entertainment, reveals itself as the most sophisticated decoder map ever created to understand the power dynamics that govern our society. Each piece represents not just an abstract strategic function, but a specific human archetype, a defined social category, and a predetermined role in the grand match that determines humanity's collective destiny. This revelation immediately destroys the democratic illusion that everyone possesses equivalent opportunities, or that individual merit constitutes the determining factor of success. The operational reality of the world divides rigorously into 6 fundamental types of people, each one occupying specific positions on the social board, moving according to invariable rules that few can perceive. The pawns represent the working masses, billions of individuals whose lives follow predictable trajectories, advancing slowly, one square at a time, keeping the system functioning through established routines. The rooks symbolize the highly productive professionals, moving in straight lines with relentless efficiency, sustaining civilizational infrastructure through exceptional technical competence. The knights embody the disruptive innovators, those non-linear thinkers capable of jumping over conventional obstacles and creating unlikely solutions that transform established paradigms. The bishops function as patient strategists, moving diagonally through decades of meticulous planning, building influence networks that activate precisely when necessary. The queens exercise immediate and multi-directional power, commanders, agency chiefs, those who hold authority over life and death, operating beyond the limitations that restrict the other pieces. And finally, the apparently fragile but eternally protected kings represent the family dynasties that control not just the pieces, but the very board where the game takes place. Understanding this social taxonomy radically transforms your perception of the surrounding reality. You cease to be a passive observer of apparently random events to become an analyst capable of decoding every movement, every strategy, and every planned sacrifice that shapes the global scenario. While billions of people live their existences without perceiving the patterns that govern their trajectories, the fundamental rules of power remain exposed, waiting only for someone to develop the necessary acuity to decipher them. Every news report, every economic crisis, every technological revolution, and every geopolitical conflict starts to make sense when observed through this revealing lens. The movements cease to seem chaotic, revealing themselves as logical sequences in a carefully orchestrated match. But once you understand the rules of the game, once you identify your current position on the social board, which strategy will you adopt? Will you accept remaining confined to the role that has been assigned to you? Or will you discover how to transcend this system of human classification completely? The answer will require that we dive deeply into the nature of each archetype, beginning with the invisible base that sustains the entire existing power structure, those millions of pawns whose collective movement determines the destiny of kings and queens. Here's the biggest irony in human history. The people everyone thinks are worthless, they're actually holding up the entire system. Think about it. Billions of humans wake up every morning and do the exact same thing. Commute to jobs that keep someone else's dream alive, buy products designed by people they'll never meet, pay taxes that fund systems they have zero control over. This boring daily routine, it's actually the foundation keeping invisible emperors on their thrones. Billions of human beings awaken each morning, executing identical rituals, commuting to jobs that perpetuate structures created by others, consuming products manufactured according to patterns established by higher instances, and paying tributes that finance systems over which they exercise insignificant influence. This apparently banal routine constitutes, in truth, the fundamental foundation that sustains invisible emperors on their distant thrones. The pawns represent the overwhelming numerical force of humanity: salaried workers, public servants, small merchants, students, and retirees who follow predictable trajectories within well-defined social corridors. Their predictability does not arise from intellectual limitation, but from the systemic need for operational stability that guarantees the uninterrupted functioning of the civilizational machine. Imagine removing all the pawns from the social board simultaneously. There would be no one left to produce food, operate factories, keep hospitals functioning, educate children, transport goods, or execute the millions of apparently minor tasks that keep society cohesive. The collapse would be instantaneous and irreversible. Kings, queens, bishops, and knights would quickly discover their absolute dependence on those they habitually despise or ignore. This paradoxical dependence explains why social control systems invest monumental resources in keeping pawns satisfied enough to remain productive, but never conscious enough to question their structural position. Standardized education, mass entertainment, directed consumerism, and superficial motivational narratives function as sophisticated tools of behavioral management. The predictability of pawns guarantees that governments can calculate tax revenues, corporations can project consumer demands, and financial institutions can anticipate monetary flows with impressive statistical precision. This calculability transforms human crowds into reliable mathematical variables within complex economic equations. Examine any urban center during morning rush hour. Millions of individuals move simultaneously in predetermined directions, following established routes, meeting synchronized schedules, and keeping the social gear turning with chronometric precision. This collective choreography does not emerge spontaneously. It results from decades of social conditioning that shapes behaviors according to specific systemic needs. However, occasionally a phenomenon emerges that challenges this apparently definitive classification: the exceptional transformation of the pawn into a queen. Andrew Carnegie exemplifies this extraordinary metamorphosis. A young Scottish immigrant who began as a worker in a textile factory, earning 17 cents per day, and ended up building a steel empire that redefined the American industrial landscape. Similar cases punctuate modern history, individuals who emerged from subaltern conditions to reach positions of global influence through exceptional combinations of strategic vision, unwavering determination, and favorable circumstances. Writers who began depending on social assistance, entrepreneurs who faced dozens of rejections before building commercial empires, and inventors whose creations transformed entire civilizations. These extraordinary examples serve a dual function in the system. They inspire sufficient hope to keep billions of pawns engaged in the pursuit of social ascension, while simultaneously masking the statistical reality that less than 1% will manage to realize significant transformations in their original social classification. The promotion of the pawn to queen in traditional chess occurs only when it crosses the entire board, overcoming all obstacles, reaching the adversary's territory, a journey that few complete and that requires perfect timing combined with exceptional capabilities. But here lies a disturbing question that exposes the manipulative nature of this dynamic. How many potential transformers remain eternally confined in subaltern positions, not due to the absence of capability, but due to the deliberate scarcity of genuine opportunities for ascension? The system needs pawns in sufficient quantity to maintain operational stability. Allowing excessive mobility would create structural turbulence that would threaten the predictability essential for the planning of the dominant classes. Thus, the stories of exceptional transformation function simultaneously as psychological escape valves and mechanisms of social control. Educational institutions perpetuate this dynamic by producing qualified graduates in numbers that deliberately exceed the positions available at the higher levels of the hierarchy. This overproduction of talents creates fierce competition for limited opportunities, keeping salaries depressed and increasing social docility among those who fear losing their relatively privileged positions. Sophisticated advertising campaigns constantly sell the illusion that specific consumer products confer elevated social status, while credit systems facilitate the acquisition of material symbols that create only the appearance of ascension without fundamentally altering the individual's structural position on the social board. This understanding leads us inevitably to the next level of the hierarchy. Those individuals who have transcended the condition of common pawn through exceptional technical competence, but who still operate rigorously within the rules established by the system. They are the highly efficient professionals, the meticulous executors who constitute the productive backbone of modern civilization, the human rooks who transform abstract plans into concrete realities. 20% of people do 80% of the work that actually matters, and they control the world through pure competence. These are the rooks, the professionals who've turned skill into superpower, the heart surgeon who operates for 16 hours straight with perfect precision. The engineer is calculating trajectories to Mars, the programmer building AI that'll change everything. Watch these human machines work, up before dawn, processing insane amounts of information, maintaining standards that would break most people. And they do this every single day for decades. Their secret? Predictable excellence. When you need heart surgery, you know they'll perform exactly like they have thousands of times before. When you board a plane, you trust that engineers have tested every single bolt and wire. But here's their fatal flaw. The rooks represent the elite professionals who have transformed technical competence into absolute operational superiority. Cardiovascular doctors who perform 16-hour surgeries with millimetric precision, aerospace engineers who calculate interplanetary trajectories, programmers who build artificial intelligence systems, and corporate managers who coordinate operations involving millions of simultaneous variables. Observe these perfectly calibrated human machines. They wake before dawn, process complex information during extended workdays, maintain standards of excellence that others consider impossible, and repeat this performance daily for consecutive decades. Their discipline transcends common obsession to reach levels of dedication that border on the supernatural. The strength of Rooks resides in the predictability of their excellence. When you schedule cardiac surgery, you trust that the professional will execute procedures with the same precision demonstrated in thousands of previous operations. When you board a commercial airplane, you assume that engineers designed each component according to rigorously tested specifications. This reliability constitutes the psychological foundation that allows modern society to function. Unlike pawns, who follow instructions established by others, Rooks create and implement sophisticated solutions to complex problems. They master specialized technical languages, manipulate advanced tools, and navigate through labyrinthine bureaucratic systems with natural ease. Their expertise confers upon them indisputable authority within their specific professional domains. The Rooks movement in chess perfectly symbolizes this mentality: straight lines, long distances, and devastating power when correctly positioned. They do not waste energy on unnecessary movements. They do not let themselves be seduced by elaborate strategies. They advance directly toward objectives with relentless efficiency. This same linearity, however, reveals itself simultaneously as their most critical vulnerability. Isolated Rooks become easy targets for agile knights who attack from unexpected angles. When confronted with situations that require lateral thinking or radical adaptation, their extreme specialization transforms into a paralyzing limitation. Consider the digital revolution that devastated entire industries during the last 3 decades. Millions of highly qualified professionals discovered that decades of expertise became obsolete practically overnight. Accountants are replaced by software, journalists are supplanted by algorithms, and financial operators are eliminated by automated trading systems. The cognitive rigidity that allows Rooks to maintain exceptional performance standards within established parameters prevents them from recognizing when these fundamental parameters are changing. They continue applying old solutions to new problems, refining techniques that have lost relevance, and investing energy in professional domains that are disappearing. Observe how doctors resist innovative treatments that threaten established protocols, even when evidence suggests superior efficacy. Examine how lawyers defend obsolete legal precedents while new technological realities make old legislation inadequate. Analyze how educators perpetuate outdated pedagogical methodologies instead of adapting to the cognitive transformations of digital generations. The Rooks' dependence on well-defined organizational structures exposes another fundamental fragility. They need clear hierarchies, standardized processes, and predictable resources to maximize their productivity. When these support systems collapse or transform rapidly, Rooks frequently face operational paralysis. During economic crises or corporate reorganizations, highly competent professionals discover that their expertise does not transfer easily between different contexts. An exceptional mechanical engineer can become completely useless in a digital services-based economy. A brilliant corporate manager can fail totally when trying to undertake independently. This vulnerability explains why Rooks desperately need knights, those non-linear thinkers capable of detecting paradigmatic changes before they become evident to conventional observers. While Rooks perfect existing systems, knights anticipate future systems that will make current ones irrelevant. The symbiotic relationship between Rooks and knights frequently determines which organizations prosper during periods of accelerated transformation. Companies that combine exceptional execution with disruptive vision manage to navigate transitions that destroy less adaptable competitors. But here emerges a crucial question that will determine the destiny of millions of competent professionals. In an era where artificial intelligence can replicate much of human technical expertise, what will be the future role of rooks on the social board? The answer will require us to understand those exceptional individuals who have always managed to jump over conventional obstacles and create unlikely solutions. The innovative knights who will completely redefine the rules of the professional game. While rooks perfect the system, knights blow it up. These are the genuinely weird thinkers, the ones who see opportunities where everyone else sees walls. They don't just think outside the box, they don't even see the box. Knights move in that strange L shape on the chessboard for a reason. They never take the obvious path, ever. They find angles nobody else can see, connect dots that shouldn't connect, and build bridges between worlds that aren't supposed to touch. Everyone thinks they're crazy until they change the world. They drop out of school because standard education feels like a straitjacket. What the system calls disorders, dyslexia, ADHD, high-functioning autism, these often give them superpowers to see connections normal brains miss. The knights represent the genuinely non-linear thinkers, whose L movement on the board symbolizes their fundamental nature. They never follow the obvious path. They always find angles that escape common perception, and they connect scattered dots in a geometry that defies traditional logic. These individuals remain underestimated for long periods, frequently ridiculed for their apparently absurd ideas, until they suddenly emerge from obscurity to surprise the entire world. Observe how these disruptive minds function. They abandon formal education prematurely because they perceive that standardized curricula limit their creative potential. Neurological conditions that the conventional system classifies as deficiencies, dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, and functional autism, frequently confer upon them exceptional capacities to visualize connections that typical brains cannot process. They initiate ventures in industries they know superficially, violating all rules of sectoral specialization. A student magazine transforms into a music label, which evolves into an airline, which expands into space exploration. Genius programmers develop security software and then abandon lucrative careers to live as digital nomads, questioning civilizational fundamentals. Underground music producers reinvent themselves as billionaire fashion designers. Content creators become influential cultural philosophers, and software engineers found artistic movements that redefine contemporary aesthetics. This categorical fluidity confuses conventional observers who expect linear and predictable professional trajectories. Their creations transcend established genres, combining disparate cultural elements in a synthesis that initially seems chaotic, but gradually reveals innovative patterns that influence entire generations. They function as translators between different disciplinary languages, discovering that principles valid in electronic music also apply to architectural design, that strategies effective in software development work equally well in organizing social movements. The genius of knights manifests precisely in this capacity to detect invisible patterns, to anticipate cultural or technological confluences years before they become evident to traditional analysts. They function as supersensitive antennas, capturing weak signals that have not yet penetrated collective consciousness, translating vague intuitions into concrete realities that transform established paradigms. They possess exceptional tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty, thriving in environments that would paralyze conventional professionals. While rooks need clear instructions and well-defined parameters, knights naturally navigate through unexplored territories where no maps or reliable precedents exist. This exceptional sensitivity, however, accompanies proportional risks. Knights live constantly on the frontier between revolutionary genius and self-destructive madness. One wrong movement, one mistaken intuition, or one poorly calculated bet can precipitate them into the abyss of spectacular failure. Their tendency to challenge social conventions frequently results in conflicts with established authorities, commercial boycotts, or even legal persecution. That is why they urgently need strategic protection provided by bishops, those patient planners who operate with temporal horizons that transcend individual lives. The bishops represent the temperamental antithesis of impulsive knights, moving diagonally through the social board with almost supernatural patience, building influence structures that develop over decades or even centuries. Edward Snowden illustrates this mentality perfectly. He spent years collecting evidence, studying security systems, and planning every detail of his revelation about global surveillance before executing one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in modern history. His methodical approach contrasts dramatically with the typical impulsiveness of knights, demonstrating how bishops operate through meticulous planning that considers long-term consequences. There are business magnates who develop strategies that extend across multiple generations, investing in technologies that will only be commercially viable in future decades. Their temporal horizons completely defy the mentality of quarterly results that dominates contemporary financial markets, basing decisions on projections about civilizational transformations that have not yet begun to manifest. The bishops protect the knights by providing structure for their creative impulses, channeling disruptive energy in strategically advantageous directions, and ensuring that revolutionary innovations are not lost in fruitless experiments. They offer accumulated wisdom, strategic contact networks, and financial resources that allow innovators to concentrate exclusively on their discoveries without worrying about mundane operational aspects. This protective function reveals itself as crucial because knights, left to their own devices, frequently self-destruct through overconfidence or dispersal of focus. Their revolutionary temperaments can lead them to unnecessary confrontations with established powers, while bishops know more effective indirect strategies to neutralize systemic resistance. Simultaneously, the bishops prepare the terrain for the queens to dominate, creating political, economic, and cultural conditions that allow the exercise of direct and immediate power. While knights generate disruptive innovations and bishops develop long-term strategies, the queens embody absolute multi-directional authority. The queens differ fundamentally from all other pieces because they can attack in any direction, at any time, covering unlimited distances in a single move. They represent intelligence agency chiefs who coordinate secret global operations, military commanders who decide the destinies of nations through whispered orders, and corporate executives whose decisions affect millions of jobs instantaneously. Observe how these figures operate beyond the rules that restrict pawns, rooks, and even knights. They possess access to classified information that remains hidden from the public for decades. They manipulate financial markets through coordinated interventions. They influence electoral processes through resources that transcend official campaign budgets. The queen in chess symbolizes power that manifests through extreme versatility combined with unlimited reach. In real society, these figures exercise influence that transcends national borders, legal jurisdictions, or conventional institutional limitations. They function as central nodes in power networks that connect governments, corporations, and international organizations in a web of mutual influence. Everyone fears the queen because her power is visible, immediate, and incontestable. When she decides to act, consequences manifest rapidly through multiple simultaneous channels. Career politicians alter fundamental positions after private conversations. Journalists modify editorial narratives without public explanations. government regulators suspend investigations that threaten specific interests. However, even these apparently supreme figures operate within limitations imposed by an even higher category, those who control not just the pieces, but the very board where the game takes place. There exists a final hierarchy that remains hidden from public perception, a ruling class whose power transcends the need for visibility or recognition, whose control manifests not through spectacular actions, but through the capacity to determine the very rules according to which all others must play. Ready for the most disturbing truth about power? The weakest-looking pieces on the board are actually the strongest. The kings, they can barely move, hide behind everyone else, look vulnerable as hell. But when they fall, game over, instantly. That's exactly how the real world works. While queens exercise power for decades, and presidents get their 4 or 8 years, certain family dynasties have controlled the global money system for centuries, uninterrupted. Their names? You won't see them in headlines. Their wealth never shows up on Forbes. Their decisions shape the planet, but good luck finding their fingerprints in any history book. Here's what should terrify you. They don't just have money, they create money. They literally control the printing presses. The kings in chess move only one square at a time, hide behind protective ranks, and appear vulnerable and dependent on the protection offered by other pieces. However, their elimination instantly ends the entire match, a dynamic that perfectly mirrors how family dynasties control global financial systems through consecutive generations. While queens exercise spectacular power for decades, presidents govern for limited terms, and even dictators eventually succumb to mortality, these hereditary lineages maintain control for uninterrupted centuries. Their names rarely appear in journalistic headlines, their fortunes never figure on public billionaire lists, and their decisions influence planetary destinies without leaving evident traces in official historical documentation. Examine any financial crisis of the last decades, and you will discover that the same banking institutions invariably emerge strengthened after each economic collapse that devastates entire populations. This capacity to transform collective calamities into private opportunities does not arise from superior business competence, but from direct control over the fundamental mechanisms that determine global monetary value and circulation. The crucial difference between commonwealth and supreme power manifests in a distinction that few can perceive. Traditional billionaires accumulate money within systems created by others, while these dynasties create and control the very systems that generate money. They possess the extraordinary prerogative to determine interest rates, regulate monetary supply, and authorize loans that finance national governments. When you understand that certain families literally print the money that everyone else fights over, the futility of conventional competition becomes glaringly evident. How can you compete in a game where your adversaries control both the rules and the manufacture of the chips used for betting? This revelation completely destroys conventional narratives about meritocracy, free markets, or representative democracy. All these concepts function as an elaborate theater that masks a much simpler operational reality. A small number of hereditary lineages determines economic policies that affect billions of people through mechanisms that transcend national borders or legal limitations. Observe how global monetary crises emerge simultaneously in multiple, apparently independent countries, how similar fiscal policies are implemented in nations with completely distinct cultures, and how coordinated economic decisions cross continents without satisfactory public explanations about the decision-making processes involved. The coordination required to orchestrate phenomena of this magnitude demands organizational structures that have operated for generations, with institutional continuity that transcends superficial political changes. Presidents alternate, parliaments renew, but the fundamental policies that determine global financial flows maintain notable consistency through decades. These families hold assets measured in tens of trillions, amounts that exceed the gross domestic products of entire continents. However, their wealth remains largely invisible because it is structured through complex networks of foundations, trusts, holding corporations, and offshore financial vehicles that fragment legal ownership in a practically undetectable way. More importantly, their power does not depend on monetary accumulation, but on control over systemic infrastructure. When you own central banks that determine national monetary policies, when you control institutions that regulate international markets, and when you influence organizations that define global commercial standards, the specific amount of money in your accounts becomes irrelevant. Money constitutes just one tool within their arsenal, useful for influencing the behaviors of subordinate classes, but unnecessary for exercising power over systems that they themselves created and maintain. They function as architects who designed the building where everyone else works, lives, and competes. This understanding reveals why conventional political reforms never substantially alter the global distribution of power. Replacing politicians, modifying legislation, and even promoting national revolutions leaves untouched the fundamental financial infrastructure that determines how planetary resources are allocated. Everyone plays chess according to apparently fixed rules, but the kings provide the board itself, decide how many squares it will have, determine how long each match will last, and select which pieces can participate. The entire system exists to perpetuate and expand their generational dominion through mechanisms so sophisticated that most participants do not even perceive their existence. Here lies the final question that will determine your personal destiny. Once you understand the real nature of this manipulated game, how will you react? Will you try to ascend within hierarchies controlled by others? Will you seek to reform systems created to resist changes? Or will you discover a completely different strategy that transcends the limitations imposed by the conventional board? The answer will require you to consider a revolutionary possibility that challenges all assumptions about how power, wealth, and freedom really function. This revelation can completely transform your relationship with this entire architecture of social control. Throughout history, there's one strategy that beats every system of control, and it's not what you think. It's not a revolution. It's not reform. It's not even resistance. It's this: stop playing their game entirely. Look at Gandhi. The British Empire had all the guns, all the money, all the power. But when millions of Indians simply stopped participating, stopped paying taxes, stopped buying British goods, stopped recognizing British authority, the whole empire crumbled. Why? Because here's the secret weakness of every power system: they need your cooperation. Without it, they're nothing. The entire global financial system runs on one assumption. We all agree that digital numbers in computers equal real value. But what happens when people stop believing that lie? Bitcoin showed us. Millions just opted out, created their own system, and governments can ban it, regulate it, attack it, but they can't kill an idea whose time has come. Consider the devastating effectiveness of passive resistance implemented by Gandhi against the British Empire. Colonialism depended fundamentally on the economic and administrative participation of the colonized, payment of taxes, purchase of British products, and acceptance of imperial legal legitimacy. When millions of Indians simply stopped cooperating with these mechanisms, the entire administrative structure began to collapse, regardless of British military superiority. The genius of this approach resides in a systemic vulnerability that few perceive. Complex power systems are inherently fragile because they depend on massive cooperation to function. When this cooperation is withdrawn simultaneously by sufficient numbers of people, there exists no military or economic force capable of restoring normal functioning. Examine how the modern financial system operates through a fundamental premise. Everyone agrees that digital numbers in computers represent real value. This collective agreement keeps functioning as a mechanism that generates trillions of dollars for banking dynasties through monetary creation from nothing. But what happens when entire populations simply stop accepting this premise? The collapse of the Soviet Union provides a fascinating historical example of this dynamic. The state apparatus possessed overwhelming military power, total control over media and education, and comprehensive surveillance systems. However, when the population lost faith in the legitimacy of the system, the entire structure disintegrated in a matter of months, despite the absence of armed revolution or external invasion. Bitcoin represents a contemporary manifestation of this same strategy. Millions of people simply opted to use an alternative monetary system that operates outside traditional banking control. Governments can prohibit, regulate, or try to suppress cryptocurrencies, but they cannot eliminate a decentralized technology that does not depend on controllable physical infrastructure. The digital revolution created unprecedented possibilities for implementing non-participation strategies on a global scale. Technologies like blockchain, encrypted communication, decentralized solar energy, 3D printing, and hydroponic cultivation allow communities to operate with increasing independence from centralized systems. But here resides the deepest aspect of this liberation. Effectively implementing the non-participation strategy requires fundamental transformation in individual consciousness. You need to develop sufficient clarity to distinguish between real needs and programmed desires, between genuine security and artificial dependence, and between authentic prosperity and compensatory consumerism. Billions of people remain trapped in the system not primarily due to physical coercion, but due to psychological conditioning that convinces them that alternatives are impossible or dangerous. Breaking this conditioning requires developing cognitive capacities that transcend conventional patterns of thinking. Examine the lives of those who have managed to effectively free themselves from conventional control systems. Tibetan monks who maintained spiritual traditions during decades of Chinese occupation, Amish communities that preserve cultural autonomy amid industrial modernity, and hackers who create technologies that make state surveillance obsolete. The common denominator among these groups is the development of internal sources of guidance that do not depend on external validation or approval. They have cultivated contemplative capacities that allow access to intelligence that operates beyond the limitations imposed by socially conditioned consciousness. This interior transformation constitutes the most crucial aspect of the liberation strategy because social control systems function primarily through the capture of attention and manipulation of mental processes. When you develop the ability to direct your attention consciously, to question automated thoughts, and to distinguish between genuine intuition and social programming, you become progressively uncontrollable through conventional mechanisms. Contemplative practices like meditation, contemplative prayer, or mindfulness techniques function as technologies of mental liberation that allow identification and neutralization of conditioning patterns that keep people psychologically dependent on external systems of validation and security. More deeply still, expanded states of consciousness reveal that common human experience operates within perceptual limitations that can be transcended through systematic spiritual development. When you directly access your nature as creative consciousness, material hierarchies of power become temporary contexts for learning, not absolute realities that determine your destiny. individuals who reach this understanding become natural catalysts for collective transformation. Their inner freedom inspires others to question fundamental assumptions about possibility and limitation. They create morphogenetic fields of expanded consciousness that facilitate similar awakenings in growing networks of relationships. Authentic revolution happens when sufficient people simultaneously embody this new frequency of consciousness, generating organic systemic changes that make old control structures progressively irrelevant. It does not require violent confrontation or forced political reorganization. It manifests through the spontaneous emergence of superior realities that overcome limitations of previous paradigms. Every change begins with understanding your role as co-creator.